Welcome back to the classes on the overview of the books of the Bible. This class is on the book of Judges. The theme of the book is the conquest to compromise. Book of Judges starts off with a great sentence. We read that in verse 1 of chapter 1. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites?" Unlike Moses, Joshua left without a successor to lead Israel. God wanted Israel to know that he is their leader and they must follow his lead. So here we find them inquiring of the Lord, and that was a wonderful act of faith. But that was the last time. Book of Judges reveal the sad story of the rebelliousness and unfaithfulness of Israel. Judges covers around 350 years of the history of Israel. Bible doesn't cover up the failures and sinfulness of its own people. Let us read Judges chapter 2, 10 to 13. After that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up, who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They provoked the Lord to anger because they forsook him and served Baal and Ashtaroth. The Canaanite gods, Baal and Ashtaroth, were god and goddess of fertility. Canaanites believed sexual union of Baal and Ashtaroth in heaven will bring great harvest in their land. So they believed if they mimic their act here with sexual relationship with temple prostitutes, it will please these gods and they will get great harvest. What a story. How did God respond to the rebellion of these people who started imitating them? He acted as he promised in Deuteronomy chapter 8. We see that in Judges chapter 2, 14 to 19. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. He sold them to their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. Unlike their fathers, they quickly turned from the way in which their fathers had walked, the way of obedience to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord had compassion on them as they groaned under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to the ways even more corrupt than those of their fathers, following other gods and serving and worshipping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. What a sad situation was that. How do you think God felt about the rebellion of these people whom he carried from slavery of Egypt and settled them in the best of the land of the earth? He wanted them to be like his own spouse. He lavished them with love and blessings that they never even imagined. He was hoping that they will be faithful bride to him. But see what happened? Within a generation, they started learning and practicing the abomination of the Canaanites and became adulterous, idol worshippers. Even then, we see the abundance of God's love. God's love is unrelenting and a pursuing love. See how rebellious these people were, but God kept chasing after them to bring them to their senses and realize that he is the only true living God and only he can give them hope and life. See God's response to them in Judges chapter 2, 1 to 3. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, "I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your forefathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? Now therefore I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. God has promised and kept that promise over all these centuries. What was his promise? I will never break my covenant with you. God also had an expectation from them. In verse 2 we read, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. But they did not keep their promise. Very quickly they turned away from God, and the way they turned away is mentioned in Judges chapter 3, 5 and 6. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods. The all-knowing God had already warned them that they should never intermarry with the people of this land, as they are living a perverted life. He knew that if they marry them, they will also become corrupted as they are. People had agreed that they will obey God, but in no time they forgot their promise to God and intermarried with Canaanites, and that was the beginning of their downfall. How often do we also become like these Israelites? We know the commands of God, but we think we know better than God, and we do opposite of what God commands. Don't worry, God, I will marry them and I will change them. Trust me. I will just tell this one lie to save my job, and afterwards I will always be honest. Let me pay off all my debts, then I will be fully committed. See, one depressing statement that is repeated in the book of Judges. Judges chapter 3, verse 12. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. This is a phrase that is repeated in this book over and over again. If God writes your story, will He write like this? That is the question we must ask about ourselves. Stories of some judges are in just few words, and some are recorded with more details, and such details are for recording their own moral failures. There are 12 judges mentioned by name in this book. First was Othniel from the tribe of Judah. He was the son of Kenaz, younger brother of Caleb. He delivered Israel from the oppression of the Edomites. The second was Ehud. He is from the tribe of Benjamin. He killed the king of Moab and delivered Israel. The third was Shamgar. He killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. The fourth was Deborah, and she was from Ephraim. And she is the only female judge, and she is also called a prophetess. Judges chapter 4, verses 4 to 5, we read, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. Under the leadership of Deborah, Israel defeated Jabin, king of Canaan, and his military commander Sisera. The next judge was Gideon. He was from Manasseh. On God's command, he reduced his army from 32,000 to 300 and successfully crushed the Midianites' army. Next was Tola. He was from Issachar. Then there was Jair. He was from Gilead. And the next one was Jephthah. He was also from Gilead, from Manasseh. He fought the Ammonites and conquered 20 cities. He swore a foolish vow that costed him his daughter's life. Then there was Ibzan. He was from Judah. And then there was Elon. He was from the tribe of Zebulun. And then there was Abdon from the tribe of Ephraim. And then there was Samson. He was from the tribe of Dan. He had many victories over Philistines. He was a superman of the Old Testament, but extremely foolish at times. His desire for Philistine women brought his downfall. Even though these judges were used by God, many of them failed morally. God often uses the most unlikely people to accomplish his plans. God using a person for his purpose does not mean that he approved their immoral life. If we think like, if God could use an immoral person like Samson, it is okay for me to also be immoral, then you are on a completely wrong track. You must remember that God used even pagans for his purposes, like Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, and many more. But that does not mean they were saved and were approved by God. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 7:21-23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. There is a huge warning in Judges, chapter 21-25. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. When we reject God, that is how our mindset can become. Because God should be the one who decides what is right and wrong. We must have the humility to accept his ways rather than following our own ways. There's something called moral absolutism. This is a belief that right and wrong are unchanging, not determined by the individual or the culture, but by God himself. The opposite is moral relativism. The belief that right and wrong are arbitrary and transitory, determined by the individual or by the culture. The idea of moral relativism is everyone has their own way of doing things. Who decides what is right and wrong? I think this is right, so I do this. Who are you to judge me? Nietzsche, the atheist, said, God is dead. If God is dead, everything is permitted. Isn't our world turning in these directions? So let us ask ourselves, which path are we taking? Satan is using the world to influence us and leave moral absolutism to moral relativism. Be careful, or else another story like Judges will be written and we will be the characters in it. So the big message of the Judges is this. They were longing for a king who will lead them into righteousness and victory. They got Saul, he failed. They got David, a man of God's own heart, who brought the nation into a great glory. But the real king who would come to fulfill the longing of all the people for a glorious and righteous king who would lead his people in the best track is Jesus, the Son of David. Jesus has come and he had the greatest conquest. He conquered every temptation and defeated the death itself through his resurrection. Now the question is Jesus your king? Are you allowing him to rule over you? Are you following his rules? Only then we can confidently say, I am in the kingdom of God. Let us be grateful for Jesus, our King and eternal leader. And let us submit to him and consider it as a blessing and honor to submit to Jesus. To God be the glory. Thank you.